Hey Computer, play About Bees podcast.
Well, hello everybody. We're back again with another episode of About Bees, Culture, Curiosity, and Comedy. No comedy. Bidzina, what are we doing today? Comedy?
Today we're going to be doing a little bit of comedy as we have Daniel on. And
Yeah, he's the funny one.
well,
Yeah, hi, Daniel.
He's our most viral guest.
The most
Is that
viral.
so?
People
Oh,
stay
my.
your distance. He's viral.
Goodness.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that came out the wrong way. But your clip, multiple of your clips, but one of them in particular has the most views and the highest retention, and is over 10,000 views. And that was, yeah, sorry.
All right, that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, for people who don't know this, we've had Daniel on the podcast earlier. So some of these podcasts end up in on YouTube, and that's what Bidzina is talking about. So Daniel, hi and welcome back. We're glad to see you again. We'll let you do your own brief introduction if you don't mind, and maybe introduce the topic that we're going to discuss with you today.
Of course. Well, thanks for having me on. This time it's not in a studio, it's over Zoom because I'm actually at McGill, and I'm studying psychology and philosophy. And this semester is very philosophy heavy. So I've been doing a lot of philosophy. For those who might not know, I am Ron's son. So
Ronson?
Ron's
Ronson.
Yes, your son, in
Ronson.
fact.
Oh, okay. Because I see our names up and they both have the same last name.
Oh, there we
Not
go.
just a coincidence then.
But hopefully people can figure that out.
Okay, so you're at McGill.
Yep. And so what I wanted to
I thought
introduce,
you guys were brothers, but sorry.
that would have been an age gap.
Not much.
Just a little.
I hardly look past 30.
Hardly. And I hardly look past 12. So there we go. I'm gonna take off my hat, but Dad wanted me to.
No, leave it on. It looks like a great lampshade.
Should I leave it on?
For a little while
Nice
longer,
guy.
at least until you tell us about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it, and then yeah.
So this I got actually. So can you guys Bidzina, do you know what it's
Abs-
of?
Is that a mushroom? Is that
It is a mushroom. I have a hat made of mushroom.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
sharp.
No, I got it
He's sharp.
in Transylvania, and I met a craftsman who could make it. And he claimed he was one of 6 people in the world who could make one. So I was like, I have to buy one. So I've got my mushroom hat for the special appearance. But
So
Sorry.
it would work on a construction site.
I doubt it would. It even melts in the rain apparently. So
Ooh.
I haven't tested it though.
we should talk more about the hat, but I'm interested about your McGill story.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Well, I'm studying at McGill, and actually a lot of what I'm studying is medieval and ancient philosophy, and a little bit of modern philosophy as well. But it's funny because occasionally when you're studying philosophy, people throw out all sorts of different, they use all sorts of different ways of illustrating their ideas. Like one really big theme, geometry always comes up, like comparing things to geometry, comparing things to medicine. But interestingly enough, people very often compare things to bees or use bees to illustrate certain philosophical ideas, which is quite cool. So I thought today we would maybe zoom in on Plato, who's talking about bees. So yeah.
No, this is an incredibly interesting topic because just a little side note, when I got a message about 4 or 5 days ago from Ron saying, "Oh, hey, this is the Zoom link. We're booked in," and I just saw I saw Plato. I had woken up and I saw the message and I just saw like Plato, but I didn't read it as Plato. I read it as something else, and I'm like, "What? I thought we were speaking with Daniel." I'm like, "Who's this guy? Who's Plato?" And for like I'm not even kidding. I didn't put it together for like a couple hours, and then I'm like, "Oh, Plato. Never mind." So this, and then my wheels really started turning to realize that he's talking about bees.
Yeah.
Or even has any mentions of bees.
Well,
So we
just
should
on this, yeah, just to mention now, we don't know that Daniel is not Plato because Plato believed in the transmigration of souls, and they could be inside of Daniel. Plato's soul might be in Daniel at this moment.
that would have been quite the downgrade for Plato.
Hey, you get
I
you
know.
get what you
think?
can
He must
take.
have done something really bad to end up with.
You can
But
get what you take. You know, it is what it is. You get your hand that you get dealt with.
Bidzina, how much do you know about Plato?
I don't know much. From what I understand, he taught Aristotle, or was it the other way around?
Yes, he taught Aristotle. Well, yeah, Aristotle was his student at his big school because he founded a school called the Academy, which was like this philosophy school that was a couple miles outside of Athens. And Athens was like this big city state. And he basically just like taught whoever was willing to come and listen to him and pay a bit of a tuition in this like forest grove outside of Athens, which actually would have been really, really fun. So that's who he was. And Plato, oh, the dog's being kidnapped there.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, dog is rescued. He no longer
Thank you,
has to
dog is
listen
rescued.
to philosophy and Plato.
Yeah. So what's really cool is like one of the first like major philosophical figures we talk about is Socrates. And Socrates was this like super strange dude. He was kind of ugly. He's a little odd. He heard a voice. He heard a voice that he called his daemon, which is where we get the English word demon. And he would go around Athens basically like picking small philosophical fights with important people. And he'd sit down and he'd have conversations with all these people. Like Socrates would like chat with playwrights and judges and lawyers and statespeople and just like poke holes in their arguments. And like he'd be like, "Oh, you're a judge. Tell me about justice. What do you think about justice?" And this like judge would start saying things about justice, and then Socrates would be like, "But you're wrong because." And this became super, super irritating. So eventually the Athenians ended up sentencing him to death, which was a very big ordeal, and this was a kind of a central point in the history of the ancient world. But Socrates was a philosopher who traveled around with a snub nose and wearing cloaks and making his way about Athens. And Plato, who was Socrates' student, and Plato wrote down these conversations that Socrates had with people. So actually, I've got in front of me here. I'll show you this big. I have a binding on it that's kind of pretty here. It's embroidered. But the Plato, his complete works are really thick. There's how many pages are in here? We've got almost 2,000 pages in his complete works. And
That is his book, or like a version of
collection.
his work.
Yeah. So they
Okay.
call them dialogues because it's
Yeah,
literally
his English wasn't that great, so this is actually a translation of his work.
Okay, I
Yeah.
see.
No, it's obviously translation because he spoke ancient Greece, but these are like podcasts before there were podcasts.
Wow,
Because it's literally just like it's a transcription of a conversation.
incredible.
Like here, I can just show you. I opened to a random page here, and you can see that we've got one person speaking,
Small
and the other
print.
person speaking, and the other person speaking, and it's basically just recording a conversation that a bunch of dudes in like 350 BC had in Athens.
And sorry, who recorded these conversations?
Plato.
Plato, and these were Aristotle's conversations.
No, these were conversations between Socrates and a bunch of just random people in Athens.
Wow. So Socrates was first,
Yeah,
and then Plato kind of built off of he came after, and then Aristotle was a direct student of Plato.
exactly.
Okay.
So it's like you could almost say that like there was Socrates, and Socrates' grad student was Plato, and Plato's grad student was Aristotle. So that's kind of the connection there.
And then the student of Aristotle who dropped out of school and decided he'd be a soldier was
Do you know Bidzina?
No, I don't. I don't.
he conquered Georgia, so you need to know
Yeah.
Oh,
this.
is it Alexander the Great? Right.
Yeah.
There's a scene in there where he is taught by well, I want to say Aristotle, but
Yes. Yeah.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. And it's played by Anthony Hopkins, I believe, Aristotle.
Ooh.
Really?
In
What
the
movie?
Alexander the Great.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Yeah,
No,
there's a scene.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting actually. That's kind of the only, I guess. Well, a lot of my knowledge comes from movies, anyways. But there you go. My secret is out.
Well, there we go. But anyhow, yeah. So Plato basically went around, and this whole huge book I've got in front of me is just like transcripts of conversations that he had with people. But there's a very extended conversation that he had with this guy named Glaucon. And this like super long conversation was split. It was so long they had to split it up into 10 chunks or 10 books. And this super long conversation is called The Republic. And The Republic is this long conversation that Plato has with Glaucon about what the perfect city should look like, the perfect republic. So it's really neat because this is like one of the very earliest exercises in like political thought, like of the question of like these Greeks were just forming little cities, and these cities were kind of peppered across these little islands in Greece. And there were tons of these little cities, and they all kind of spoke roughly the same language. And these people decided to organize their cities differently. Like some of the cities became super warlike, and they focused entirely on physical training,
Sparta,
conquest, like Sparta. And some of them were super intellectual, and they liked to sit around and read
like
and think,
Athens.
like Athens. And then you had some that were like super mercantile. They like to trade and make colonies. And so there were a lot of questions about what sort of city should we build? What's the best looking, what's the best city to live in? And what
Uh,
should we strive for?
so at that time period, when you had all these different specialized cities and stuff,
Yep.
was there a unified idea of Greece, or there was no such thing as Greece at the time, or like the Greek Empire or Hellenist, like
That's That's a good question. They had a bit of a sense of identity. They saw each other as Greek-speaking peoples.
okay,
Like they saw each other as Greeks, and it's really funny because Aristotle actually loves saying really mean things about foreigners. So it's really funny because he sees Greeks as and actually so does Plato sees Greeks as being the best, the finest people. And to the north they have barbarians who are too spirited and not intelligent enough. And then he sees people to the south as being kind of lazy and don't have enough spirit, but they're smart though. So
yeah.
he sees the Greeks and the Greek world as being kind of the best sort of people, and they did share a language. But you didn't have really a sense of Hellenic civilization until Alexander the Great, who conquered your country, Bidzina.
Well, it's interesting you say that because when you look at the Alexander the Great Empire, or whatever it's
Hmm.
the empire that he left Georgia out.
Did he really?
Well, parts of it. I think he took parts, but we had a very close relationship with the Greek world, and they oftentimes, when they would go conquering the East, they would leave Georgia out of it and leave us to become some sort of vessel state or an autonomous state or like they would allow us to keep our culture in to a higher degree than they did to the other cultures, and that also comes from that. Some people say Georgia was like a colony of Greece, like we came from Greece, like the Gregorian, like Georgian comes from the word Gregorian because it means
Uh-huh.
tiller of the lands. We used to provide them with supplies for food, resources, and so I don't know if I guess we were conquered. Never mind. I just pretty much described if that sounds pretty much conquered to me. Yeah, yeah,
Well, it's
But
not
in a totally good way.
yeah. Because we kind of accepted it in a way, and there's a lot of like the Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleece, and there's all
Mhm.
sorts of ancient Greek mythologies that are actually based in Georgia.
Interesting.
Okay,
And
I have a question. I have a question for you in this regards. Now, today, modern people, when we hear the word Greece, we think of that clump of islands hanging at the end of Europe. But back in those days, wasn't Greece what is now Turkey, like at least the northern part of Turkey?
correct. It was Turkey was Constantinople, and Istanbul was. I'm sorry. Wait, did I just mess that up?
No, that's the case. Yeah, it used
But
to be Constantinople and now
So,
well, no,
because I
but
think, yeah,
it's called Anatolia, though. That was the capital.
Anatolia,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
And
and
that was at one time Greek until actually pretty recently, I think, wasn't it? Until
the whole
like the
western coast
600.
of Anatolia, that part of the world, the whole western coast was Greek. And in fact,
yeah,
many great philosophers were Greek, and or many of the
or
great Greek
Anatolian or
philosophers
yeah.
were were Ionian from that part. So that they called that
Mhm.
region Ionia, the part that was
Okay.
that coastline of Anatolia. And even many of the letters in the New Testament that were sent to Greek churches were sent to places like Ephesus, which are today in Turkey, but at the time would have been completely Greek speaking.
Okay. Okay. And on a modern map, that coastline that used to be Greek and is now Turkish, it borders the country of Georgia. So Georgia kind of sat there next to Greece, bordering
Yes.
Greece in those days, or at least Greek-speaking people, and maintained its autonomy or semi-autonomous kind of a state. Okay, we've digressed a bit, but I'm always curious about this country of Georgia. I didn't know anything about that there was another Georgia. I wonder if there's another Florida somewhere. Now I know there's another Georgia because of you, Bidzina, being from originally born in Georgia. Daniel, I'm
I
sorry, we're kind of
I
runging
hope
around here.
Oh, all good.
I hope there isn't another Florida.
That couldn't be good.
Yeah,
But
two
anyway,
Floridas, that would be wild.
that would be. Um, but anyhow, so the Republic is like this really long conversation that's so long that it had to be like split into like 10 episodes, basically. It's like one massive podcast. And what's really interesting is the entire thing is trying to figure out through conversation what the perfect city would look like. And this is cool because this is like one of the first times we were sitting down to think of like what sort of city should we build. And what's really interesting is one of the main themes throughout the Republic is that the way the city is structured should mirror the way the human soul is structured. So the individual human's soul and the city they inhabit should have the same structure. And what's interesting is Plato had an idea that there were three parts to the soul. There was the rational part. So when we're like doing math or we're doing geometry, especially at their time, they would have been doing a lot of that, or we're reasoning through a problem, we're applying the rational part of our soul. He said we had a spirited part of the soul, which is the one that has emotions and or emotions and strong feelings and wants to fight, wants to be victorious, wants to engage with the world. And then we also have the appetitive type part of the soul, which has appetites, hunger, thirst, it's cold, and it's the one that kind of feels and has these more primal urges.
It,
So it was
is this being referred to the ethos, pathos, logos, or is that separate? Is that not Plato?
I don't know. What's
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't. Well, it was just some triangle. It's emotion, logic, and reason. Something.
Logic and reason definitely would be both held within the rational part of the soul for Plato. So that wouldn't be split. But no, his idea was that we have this tripartite division of the soul. So because he thinks the city should mirror the soul, there should be a tripartite division of the city. And so he divides the city into three classes. Ones that he calls the bronze people, and the bronze people are laborers and workers, the silver people who are soldiers, and the golden people who have to rule. And the golden people are philosophers. They use their reason, and that's the most accentuated part of their souls. And the soldiers, the most accentuated and strong part of their soul is the spirited part, the one that wants to fight, to be glorious. And then for the bronze people, the ones who labor and work and farm, are the ones whose appetites are the strongest part of their soul. So this is how Plato kind of divides up the ideal city. And it's interesting because for him, the ideal city is an aristocracy, which is really funny. And in fact, in the Republic, and actually the part we're going to look at more closely today, the Republic, he splits into, or the Republic, he said that this aristocracy is the best kind, but he notes that there are 5 kinds of republic or like perfect city you could have. And he goes through them and he talks about why each one isn't good. And this is where drones start to come in because he makes an analogy between the hive, the beehive, and a city, which is kind of cool. This is like the way he like helps express his
So
idea.
Plato uses the beehive with all those bees in it to symbolize a perfect society or just any society?
Any society, he plays with the organization. Because remember how Plato had his 3 classes in his society? He had the workers, the soldiers, and the rulers.
Mhm.
So he sees the beehive, or at least implicitly, he sees the beehive as having the king, which is actually a queen, the worker bees and drones. And the drones he sees as a very undesirable class, but we'll get into that. He sees the drones as a problem in the beehive. But to get to that, we first have to see, so he already told us that he believes an aristocracy is the best sort of a society. Where do you think he puts a democracy? He has 5 types of societies ordered from best to worst. Where do you think he puts a democracy? And this might surprise you.
So he puts aristocracy at number 1.
Yes, yes.
Well, based on that, I'm gonna guess at the bottom.
Almost at second from the bottom.
Second from bottom.
So he
Okay.
says
What
the
was-
best type of,
yeah,
so
sorry,
the
go
best
ahead.
type of society, he says, is an aristocracy. The worst type of society, he says, is a tyranny. But he said the second worst is a democracy,
Huh.
which is really interesting. And Plato did live in a democracy for a while, which is quite interesting, but he didn't like it.
And
So
he didn't like the form of democracy that they were practicing back then, because like it was only like landowners that could vote, right?
no. So if only landowners could vote, that would be an oligarchy, and he puts that as third.
Oh, okay.
So a democracy was where everyone could vote.
Right.
And
That's
it
what he
was
was.
all citizens, and citizens were basically men who lived in the city. So
Okay.
in his time, women and children were not counted as citizens of the society.
So he would be even more. He would be rolling in his grave if he found out what's happening now.
He sure would be. Yeah. So no, he was not a big fan of democracies. But so he starts out with an aristocracy. He says this is the best sort of city because aristocracy. So ocracy always means rule of. So it's somebody who rules. And aristocracy, aristos, ario, it always means noble or fine. So it's the rule of the finest or the rule of the noblest. And so an aristocracy is that, and he thinks that the people who should rightly rule are philosophers, because philosophers can understand what the ideal city would look like and can bring it into being. While others aren't so engaged in trying to figure out what would our city ideally be. They're more interested in kind of the hand-to-foot existence of day-to-day life.
There was that, but I'm going to be a cynic here and say that he was a philosopher. So of course he'd put himself, and being in control of everything would be the smartest thing that humanity could do.
Is there?
I'm not pleased. I'm not pleased.
Is there also a coincidence that it's Socrates and Aristotle, and it's aristocracy?
Oh, it even gets better because Plato's original name was Aristonus. He was born as Aristones. That was his name before he adopted the name Plato, because it means broad. And he had a big, broad forehead, but also big, broad shoulders. And he was broad thinking. So he was Plato the Broad.
And he was a wrestler, actually. That's
and
where
was he? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he was a wrestler. That's where he got the broad shoulders nickname from.
I see. He was a wrestler. Yeah.
And then
they were very, very active back then, even the philosophers.
Oh yeah, they were very active. Oh my, yeah, actually, and Plato in the Republic says that the way we educate people should be through teaching them music and teaching them gymnastics. And gymnastics included wrestling. That was one of the biggest parts of gymnastics in that time. So that was a really big part. But yeah, he was a wrestler. So anyways, so he has this aristocracy idea that the finest should rule, the philosophers should rule, because the philosophers have kind of a special access to like the perfect divine form of a city that they can then try to bring down. And what's interesting is then he said that the next best way of ruling, but it's worse than an aristocracy, is if not the golden people, the aristocrats rule, but instead the silver people. And do you remember who the silver people were? The second best people?
The soldiers.
The soldiers.
So they would create a democracy.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. That's the word he uses, a timocracy. So that's the rule of people who are spirited.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Wait. He would call it
the guns.
He would call it a democracy or a dictatorship.
A timocracy. It's kind of a funny word that you don't really see elsewhere.
Okay.
But it means a rule of kind of very spirited people who are usually soldiers or fighters or arguers.
They have the guns, the swords, and the knives. This is the leaders of a timocracy.
So the modern day equivalent of a military coup.
Essentially.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
And the interesting thing, though, is that the reason I think that Plato puts this as the second best is because Plato lived in a reasonably unstable time where there were a lot of wars. So for him, it was very important that a city was safe because it was not a guarantee. Physical safety was not a guarantee in Plato's day. So he would have placed a military coup, basically, a rule of soldiers or a rule of spirited men, as quite high up on the ladder,
right.
which is interesting to know his life context to make sense of that. But then the next one he thinks of is an oligarchy. And when oligarchy was, do you remember, Bidzina, the technical definition here?
Well, I thought oligarchy meant very powerful individuals in society get together to cooperatively rule.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was
But there could be still landowners and they're not oligarchs. 'Cause that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. What the landowner thing is like, didn't they make a rule where like you have to be a male and a landowner, right?
well at their time, to a large extent, your wealth was determined by how much land you own.
Okay.
So it was very much like it kind of went hand in hand, like land ownership and wealth. But you're completely right that it is a rule of like a small number of wealthy people.
Yep.
And so he said that was the third best. But here's the funny thing, and this is quite interesting, is that he says that there is an issue. There are a couple issues with an oligarchy, and this is when he starts to really start being like, "Ooh, now we have problems with our cities." The first issue is that it's not the finest people who rule, but the richest. And the richest people usually aren't terribly good at their jobs, if their job has nothing to do with their riches. So, for example, he says something like, "Would we want the richest person on the boat to be its captain, or would you want the most competent seaman to be the captain?" You'd
Yeah.
want to have the most competent seaman to be the captain, not the richest person on the boat.
That is so profound because we know we're
Yeah.
dealing with that right now.
We absolutely are. No, we absolutely are because
He was talking about that how long ago? How long is that he was talking about?
2,400 years ago.
Yep.
Wow.
2004. And when we get further, there are things that I was rereading this last night and I was reading it about democracy and my head was popping. I was like, the fact that people knew this 2,400 years ago and we're still making the same mistakes is really sad.
Yeah, that is very sad, and it's almost like what the heck? Like I don't know. Sometimes like I'm thinking like it's on purpose because we have it so well documented, and we see the results that come from it, and we still repeat it, or maybe it's
We,
just
we
insanity.
tend to make the same mistakes
Yeah.
over and over again. And one of the things I think is interesting is a lot of times, this is a bit of a tangent, but sometimes when there's a big intellectual revival, people go back to studying the Greeks. So the Renaissance, people studied the Greeks. The Jena Romantics, like the German Romantic movement, they studied the Greeks. So every time there's kind of a revival of a culture, people return to the Greeks because there's so much richness in the Greeks. And the Greeks have this special sense of youth and excitement in them that's really contagious. And it's very stimulating. So it's neat.
Now this is it's controversial what I'm going to say,
All
but
right, let's hear it.
the
No,
modern
I'm gonna close my ears. I don't want to hear this. It's controversial. We don't do controversy on this. This is a beekeeping pod, like bees and wild bees and ants. Like, go ahead.
um, the modern Greek that lives in Greek today,
Yep.
Greece today, are they the same as Aristotle? Or like are they the same people as the people of Aristotle that lived in Greece?
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. It would have been
When you got to bring up the controversial part, I'm still waiting to hear that.
I don't know, because some have claimed that just like the Egyptians, the people that built the pyramids are not the same people that live in Egypt right now, and the same society that built Greece, they moved, they moved north, they moved away because of war and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, in Egypt,
It was
it's a
like
bit
brain drain kind of happened.
No, in Egypt it was different because during the rise of Islam, there were a large number of Arabs who colonized Egypt.
Right. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, is there a lot of the same? Because the Greece at one point, the Ottoman Empire was very in control of that area for.
Not much. The Greeks stayed roughly the same. The Greeks had a much larger empire,
Right.
but Greece itself, like where Athens is, wasn't really conquered. It's the same people roughly. Yeah.
It's the same people. Okay. All
But
right.
here, we'll return to this because I think we're gonna have more like profound things that you'll find interesting. But yeah, his first problem with an oligarchy is that like the richest person on the boat shouldn't be commanding the boat. The person who should be commanding the boat is the best seafarer. And then the
Right.
second point he had, and this I found really interesting actually. He said the problem with an oligarchy is he says that of necessity it isn't one city, but two. One city of the poor and one city in the rich, living in the same place and always plotting against one another.
Oh my
So
goodness, that's so modern.
it is modern, and this comes to kind of the key of what his problem with the drone bees is going to be, is that he sees the problem with the oligarchy is you have separate cities that just happen to inhabit the same place, not one organic whole. And Theo really emphasizes the fact that a city and a community needs to be one interconnected organic whole, the way our soul is one. So again, he always brings back. No, go ahead.
No, I didn't. Well, I was just gonna say so, and the way to do that is everybody in the city would have to have the same goals. Okay.
The same goals as to build the perfect city.
Right.
And the philosophers are the only ones who know what the perfect city looks like by an almost kind of mystical connection. But everybody deep down wants to bring the perfect city into being, and they all work together on that goal. So it's one interconnected organic unit.
Even if you're made out of platinum, or not platinum, if you're made out of bronze, you're still part of this over this big vision. But in oligarchy, you've got people who are at war against, like the rich want to get richer, the poor want to have some say and some power and some of the wealth that the rich have. So it's never a balanced, even, united vision for the future.
Exactly. You have two cities with different visions for the future that are stuck on top of each other because they happen to live in the same space.
Got it. That makes yeah, so that's the oligarchy.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Yeah. That's an oligarchy. And
so we went from aristocracy to timocracy, which was the rule of the vile, or not the violent, the vile, not the vile, the soldiers. Yeah. And now we're at the oligarchy, which is the rule of a few very wealthy.
Very wealthy. And in the oligarchy, and this is going to take us to the bees right here.
Okay.
And what he asks is, let's see whether this constitution, so an oligarchy's constitution, admits the greatest of all evils. So he said there's one great evil in city planning or city design. What is this great evil? What it is it's allowing someone to live in the city who belongs to none of its parts. He's neither a moneymaker, a craftsman, a member of the cavalry, a hoplite, but isn't engaged in the organic whole at all. And this is the person, and he says that this is the type of person who can sell all of his possessions and just go on living in the city as a rich man because he just sold everything off. But he doesn't engage with the city. He plays no role in the city. He just sits on his money. And what's interesting is that this is the greatest of all evils in city design for Plato, and he compares this person to a drone. And he says, as a drone exists in a cell and is affliction to the hive, so this person is a drone in the city and affliction to it.
Now, did he know that the drone serves purpose, though?
I don't think he did. That's the funny thing. And I'll read one more. This is a very interesting little passage, and we'll discuss it because this will tell us a lot about how much he knows about drones. He says, hasn't the god made all the winged drones stingless? So first off, he says, God made winged drones to have no stings. So far, that sounds correct. As well as some wingless ones. Now, Dad, this is a question for you. Are there wingless drones?
You're asking me if there are wingless drones.
Yeah, I don't think
well, no, I think little kids sometimes pull their wings off, but other than that, no, absolutely not.
So
there are no wingless. I wonder if some of the not philosophy, some of the science of his day would have seen things like termites or some types of ants as being wingless drones, but inside of a bee colony, no, there are no wingless adults. All adults have wings.
So you think these very early natural scientists might have confused bees and ants in certain circumstances?
It might be if he's claiming that there would be
No, he's very clear. He's
wingless.
saying,
It's
Could,
really
could,
fascinating that he's clear about the fact that there is a group of bees that have no stinger. I think
could
that's
they?
pretty,
Yeah,
natural. Yep.
yeah, that's actually good. So if they knew that they were stingless, they definitely. But what I was gonna say is, could there be a lost in translation issue where maybe he meant they're behaving like wingless bees? I don't know. I couldn't.
I don't think so. I would have to ask one of my professors who actually read the Greek. But I think he is saying that there are drones that don't have wings in a beehive, which is really strange.
Yeah, that's just wrong scientifically.
And then here's the funny thing, these wingless drones that are just wrong again, and maybe honestly, he might just be imagining here. He says some of them have stingers and some of them don't, but he calls them both drones,
Hmm.
which is really unusual.
Well,
So it seems
it's
like his
it's
understanding of a beehive was probably second or third hand, if
no,
that.
that's fine. I mean, it doesn't matter if people speak well or evil of you as long as you get mentioned once in a while. So here he is talking about bees in the Republic, and I'll take that, even if it's totally wrong. But it could be that he was aware of the queen bee that can look a little bit like a drone because it's the bigger bee and it does have a stinger. So, if you would group together the bigger bees as being the drones, I don't know if he had a special place in his vision of nature for queens as being a totally like being the ruler. I know that Aristotle, who may have learned everything he knows about bees from Plato, got
No,
everything wrong. Yeah,
no, his,
Aristotle was so
yeah,
wrong about bees.
Plato almost never left the city. Like Plato
Okay.
spent his entire time in the city. He left the city like once that we know of. To yeah, at the beginning of Phaedrus, to go for a stroll. But for the most of his life, he just lived in the city and he did not want to leave it. He enjoyed people. Aristotle, on the other hand, Dad, was such a little naturalist. He spent so
Hmm.
much of his time on islands. He was the first one to look at marine biology. He spent so much time looking at all sorts of animals. He has an entire book called on animals, on generation and corruption. And he really, really enjoyed studying biology. He's really the first biologist.
Okay.
Although I'm
Okay.
sure
He just
you do a great job with the bees.
No, he didn't do a very good job with the bees. His idea was that all the workers in a hive have stingers. Therefore, they're all males. Because throughout all of nature, the creatures, whether it be, and he even says this about snakes, which is totally untrue, but any creature that has venom and poison and stingers is a male.
Yeah.
And it just makes logical sense because the men are stronger than the females. So that was Aristotle's thought. Then that all the workers in a hive have to be warriors. They are the ones who because they have
Uh-huh.
stingers, so they must be males. But remember, it was also, and I love this one, Aristotle, who said that men have more teeth than women because men are bigger. And Aristotle never bothered to actually get people to open up their mouth and count the teeth inside their heads because he would have known immediately that women have exactly the same number of teeth as men. But he just made the assumption without looking, without testing, without describing, without drawing, without peeking into anybody's mouth. He just made the assumption that men have more teeth than women. That's Aristotle's biology.
That's very interesting that he's both kind of silly and very, very genius like, that we're still talking about him 2,500 years ago or later.
Well, the interesting thing about Aristotle is he was the first person to think that you could have a science of nature. Because before people thought the only things we could have like a scientific understanding of and actually have knowledge of were mathematical truths. And people tended to think that the world of nature was just too chaotic to describe mathematically. And it wasn't even worth trying. And Aristotle was the first one to kind of just start from very simple perceptions of nature and just start categorizing his perceptions. And so
Okay. I'll give him a cigar. I'll give him a cigar and some food stamps so he doesn't go hungry for that. But then Plato
Sorry,
had a different way of yes.
just before we move off of Aristotle, I just wanted to so I consulted with the Gemini, the robot thing, and this is what it said. So Aristotle, keen observer of the natural world, has quite a bit to say about bees and drones in his work of history of animals. Here are some of his key observations and theories. So drones are males. So Aristotle correctly identifies drones as males in the hive. He understood their primary function was to mate with the queen bee, but he was puzzled by the bee reproduction as he couldn't observe the mating process directly. He theorized that the worker bees were female and somehow spontaneously generated drones, while the king bee, what we now call queen, produced both workers and kings. And this was, of course, incorrect understanding of bee reproduction, but reflected the limitations of observation at the time. And then it kind of goes on. He also talked about the divine nature of bees. While it's not specifically about drones, you're going to talk about that one?
Well, I've got to say this about Gemini. It needs to go back to school. Aristotle did not say that the workers were female. He never did. He didn't. He believed they were male because they had stingers.
I have on the generation of animals, but unfortunately only certain chapters, and it doesn't look like I can look at his bees because they omitted his chapters on bees.
Okay.
So I won't be able to go straight to the source to see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess
Gemini apparently didn't go. Yeah, Gemini didn't go straight to the source either. Instead, it picked up what some other people had written on the internet.
Well, it's going off of some University of Chicago Aristotle History of Animals, and then ResearchGate.net. Why does Aristotle think bees are divine?
How about next?
So this is written not by a naturalist, but by an arts and science or an arts philosophy student. Then
something like that. But
yeah,
we will not take it. Wait, but we were talking about Aristotle, right? He's the one that's talking about drones, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Plato is talking about drones and their severe extreme usefulness inside of a hive and how we should all aspire to being drones.
Okay, then Gemini is completely off because it doesn't think Plato talked about bees at all.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, because he mentioned it very in passing. But next episode, we can definitely do one on Aristotle and bees. That could be quite interesting.
Okay. Then we'll all study up and we'll all be advocates for a different point of view.
Sounds good. Sounds great.
Okay. Meanwhile, back to Plato.
We should continue here. So where were we with Plato? We said that the problem with an oligarchy is it allows people to exist within a city that don't play a role in the city. They're not a part of the city. They don't have a job. They just sit there on their money. And he compares them to drones. And he says then that as a drone exists in a cell and is an affliction to the hive. So he thinks drones are an affliction to the hive. So this person is a drone in the city and an affliction to it. So that's quite funny that's his allegory there is he clearly here doesn't recognize that drones played a role in the hive. And in fact, it seems like his taxonomy here is wrong because he says that some of them are winged and some of them are wingless. And some of the drones apparently even have stingers, some of the wingless ones. So that's quite unusual there. But I think he's taking some third-hand biology and he's intentionally fudging it to prove a point that he's trying to make about the city.
He should have waited till Aristotle brought him his findings and then used that instead of whoever he was using.
That probably would have been better.
They didn't have magnifying things at the time, right? They didn't have things to magnify.
No, they probably didn't.
No, that wasn't invented yet, right?
No, it took a while
until Lacouven, whoever his name was back in around 1600. Leeuwenhoek.
I think
is that his name? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but
so they were 2,000 years before that.
But didn't they like observe the stars a lot or something like that?
They certainly, they
And
definitely
the
did.
planets, like they knew something about the solar system, didn't they?
They had a
Mhm.
very good understanding of astronomy, actually, like fantastically good.
Okay.
They spent a lot of time and they inherited a lot of records from the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were super into stargazing, and the Greeks did that too. And it's really actually my professors who study this quite in depth, they argue that the development of mathematics is a consequence of Greek and Babylonian obsession with the motion of the stars. And if you read especially Plato, but also Aristotle and a lot of people like Ptolemy coming later, were just making the most complex mathematical models based purely on trying to predict the motion of the heavens. And that's really the root of mathematics, which is quite
And
cool.
and their main form of observing was just with their eyes.
With their eyes, they did have a couple of tools. They had I forget what they're called, but I think it's called a sextant with
Yeah,
the
sextant.
angle. And they would use those to get very precise measurements of the angles and the position relative to the horizon. And funnily enough, I actually I took most of a course called Early Greek Mathematics, and it was really based on astronomy. And one of the simplest tools that they used to describe the motion of the stars was a gnomon, which is just simply a stick in the ground. And the stick in the ground would cast a shadow with the motion of the sun. And if you trace the shadow of the gnomon every day, you can actually do an awful lot with that at looking at how the sun moves through the year and through like over the day. So
Wow.
it's pretty interesting how much you can do with so little.
So they invented the spirograph?
Pretty close.
Wow. Wow, I love that. I really like that. Well, wasn't it the Greeks who used that? How do you say it? Monam?
Gnomon.
Gnomon. They
And
used a gnomon to get the uh, circumference of the Earth.
yes, yes.
Is
And
that
they
right?
calculated it
Yeah.
quite accurately. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
they knew the Earth was round.
Yep.
Yep.
And they could use gnomons placed at different latitudes in order to determine the circumference of the Earth. And they also
Right.
tried to
Right.
estimate the distance of the sun from the Earth, also just using a gnomon. So it's
Wow.
pretty incredible how much you can do with a stick in the ground if you have enough
Hmm. If you have
ingenuity.
enough brain power. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great. That's great.
So
Okay.
yeah. Here, I'll move us on to the democracy because I think this is
No, wait,
quite.
wait, wait, wait. I want to make sure that we're so under the oligarchy,
Yep.
or how do you say it is just oligarchy or holacracy?
No, oligarchy. Yeah.
Okay, okay, because the other was a democracy and a aristocracy. So I was wondering if there's an oligarchy or something, but
No.
no, oligarchy. So in the oligarchy, is that the only system that Plato mentions the drones as being these useless creatures?
No, he says they also exist in democracies.
Okay.
They also exist in democracies, and it's because democracies also commit this big error of allowing people to exist in a city even if they're not a part of the city.
And what's he define as being part of a city?
You're a part of this organic whole of moving towards the same goal. So you play a role in society. You have a defined function.
Okay.
So he
But
doesn't.
could criminality be one of the roles that you could play?
Note, because in the divine city, in this perfect city that he kind of imagines,
Okay.
that's not a role that's there. So if the role
Oh.
isn't in the kind of form of a city, like in
Hmm.
Athens, it's not going to be, it's not something we should have down here.
Okay. So there was no way for someone like me to make a living.
No, there wouldn't have been. No, you could be a good sophist.
What's a sophist?
They're the equivalent of lawyers at the time.
You think I'd be a good sophist?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. People would come to you and you'd have to write speeches for them so they could defend themselves in court.
Oh, I wouldn't go in and defend them?
No, actually, you weren't allowed to, which was interesting. You had to, if you were sued in ancient Greece, you had to defend yourself personally in front of a
What
judge.
if you had a really bad stutter or you couldn't talk at all? Like, that's just not fair.
That's too bad. Well, maybe they'd have
Jeez.
exceptions in certain cases, but I don't
Mm,
think the Greeks would be too open to that.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're up to democracy now, which is the second to the worst of all forms of government,
The worst of
according to
all.
Plato.
Exactly. So he did not like it very much. And
But
one of
his mother's family and all of her people invented democracy. That side of his family was actually the inventors of Greek democracy. So do you think he was having mummy issues?
I don't think that's what it was. I think it's more that he saw that when there was a democracy in place, it things didn't go very well because people made very poor decisions. Because he sees especially that well, here he writes that democracy comes about when the poor are victorious, killing some of their opponents and expelling others, and giving the rest an equal share of ruling under the constitution, for the most part assigning people to positions of power by lot. So he says that positions of power are not distributed based on who's good, it's up to chance. So if we take the ship analogy again, it's not that you have the wealthiest person on the ship ruling, not that you have the best person on the ship ruling. You assign who gets to run the ship by chance, by a roll of the dice. And he says that this is a very, very, very bad idea because people typically don't have the education or the capacity to do that. And one of the things he says, and this was quite interesting as I was reading it, is he says that what do people living in democracies think the good is? And the answer is freedom. People in democracies think that freedom is the good. But he says that in their overemphasis on freedom, they trample everything else underfoot. And they become so incredibly obsessed with freedom that other good things that require discipline and order go ignored. And then the state eventually falls into chaos. And he says, when the state falls into chaos, then it's prime time for a tyrant to jump up and take control. So essentially,
Oh,
what Plato sees as the problem with a democracy is that it has so little cohesiveness that it's very easy for a tyrant to pop out and gain control.
okay. So I want to ask you a question here. So you described that democracy sometimes arises when people kind of rise up against the oligarchy, and now you're
Yes.
saying tyranny will sometimes arise out of democracy. So is this kind of like does Plato have like a circle envisioned in his mind where one leads to another and then to another and then
Doesn't have a circle, but he has a downward trend.
oh, okay.
So
When
he
you
said
reach the
that,
bottom?
and when you reach the bottom, you're stuck in a tyranny, in a dictatorship. But it
Mhm.
definitely degenerates from being an aristocracy to being a timocracy to being an oligarchy to being a democracy down to a tyranny.
Okay. Okay. So
So
he's against democracy on the basis that those who are in charge are not necessarily the best people to be in charge.
yes, and also because
And
people
also,
in democracies overemphasize the value of freedom to the
mm,
point that they toss out other things that are also good.
okay.
So, and one of the things he sees as being good that's thrown out is education, because education requires discipline, and
Hmm.
discipline means restricting your freedom. And
Right.
so people who live in democracies aren't willing to get educated, and so they don't learn to cultivate themselves, to restrict their freedom voluntarily and really apply themselves. All they want is freedom. And so there was this little passage that I thought was kind of interesting here that I highlighted. So he's talking about people living in a democracy, and he says, isn't it magnificent the way they trample all this underfoot, giving no thought to what someone is doing before he entered public life, and by honoring him only if he tells him that he wishes the majority well? So, in essence, you don't have to be well educated to rule in a democracy. You just have to tell people what they want to hear. And the people don't always want to hear what's good. They want to hear something that flatters them, or that
Mm.
they're really cool, or that they'll get a bunch of money next year. So it's really funny that he says that people just trample everything underfoot. That isn't freedom. And
Well,
so, yeah.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bidzina. Yeah, no.
No, please. I didn't mean to finish that statement.
No, I think that was I
I
think
was
that
just
was
gonna. s-
that.
I
And
was,
he really says that this degenerates into anarchy quite quickly
wow.
because there's so little order that a despot will come to power. Somebody who just rules comes to power because there's so little holding the group together.
Wow. No, that's well, democracy, if you think about it, it's kind of like a big popularity contest. And well, it's a popularity contest. And yeah, whoever can say what, like, can throw out the most red meat to their audience, those are generally the winners. And yeah, well, I think of it this way, right? Like, we can do our banking online. Why can't we do our voting right through our phone? Because they need to really make that process super easy, allow everyone to vote, and be very clear with to what we're voting for, not just a name. Like, specific laws underneath this person that they're promised to pass or they're in favor of. And I don't know. And now that's going on a tangent, but it's a big popularity contest.
It's a big popularity contest. I don't think making it easier to vote would make Plato happy at all, because he'd just say more dumb people will vote more quickly.
Right, but if you have an educated voter base,
that's exactly what I was going to say. That is what Plato wants. He says the solution is education. And for him, education means physical education and education in the muses, or essentially the humanities, what we'd call them today. But really, that encompassed everything. So he said we really need a well-educated voter base so that it's not just the philosopher who has access to this divine model of the perfect city, but everyone has been educated in a way that they can see what the perfect city looks like for themselves and then will vote accordingly. And so this is a less extreme form of democracy, which is essentially a democracy of the educated, which is very similar to what he says an aristocracy is, because aristocracy is the rule of the finest. And what makes someone fine, this class of golden people that Plato talks about, are the educated, the well-educated. And what's really funny, this is a funny anecdote because we're talking about tyranny and what's the way out of tyranny. There's this one tyrant who actually my professor mentioned in class, who isn't mentioned anywhere else except in one part of Plato. And he was a terrible, terrible tyrant that people were saying he was going to get his head cut off soon because he was just destroying his city. Like he was doing awful. And Plato told him, you should have studied geometry. The reason is because if he had been more educated and had studied things like geometry, which is mathematics, and the Greeks had this idea about geometry's geometric truths are true anywhere. They're true on Mars, they're true here. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, the Pythagorean theorem, no matter where you are in the universe, that's going to hold. And for Plato, too, the perfect city was also a truth like this, that no matter where you are in the universe, it's going to hold. So he tells the despot, the tyrant, you should have studied geometry because you would have realized that there are some things you can't get away with and some truths that will always hold no matter where you are. So sit down and read before you think you're capable of ruling. And
wow.
that was a very interesting idea that the Greeks had.
Now, all of this that you're saying is so relevant to literally like right now, like today, this week. Like, for example, the there's the presidential elections going on in the U.S.
Yeah,
it's happening like just in November, a couple of weeks, pretty much. But before that happened, there was a bunch of Republican primaries that happened, and one of the candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy. Do you guys know about Vivek?
I
So
do.
I haven't heard about him.
So he was a Republican candidate, and what he proposed, if he became president, he was gonna make it so that if you wanted to vote, you had to either serve military service, you had to have some time in the military, you have to either be a taxpayer or above the age of 25. Those are the three criteria he wants to do for the voter base to, I believe, kind of deal with this issue, to not have because a lot of times when you have like you're still developing and you don't, like, I don't know, when you reach the age of 25, I don't know that one's, but like the military service one makes sense. And if you're paying taxes, like that kind of, you should kind of be able to vote. But I don't know. What do you guys think about those three things there?
Well, here's what I think he's trying to do. And what I think he's trying to do is make it that college students can't vote. Because typically college students are much more left-wing and would not be voting for him. And so this is an easy way for him to try to exclude a large chunk of the population that would vote against him.
Right, but yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, but if we read it in the context of Plato, this is something Plato would have approved of.
Right.
Plato has stricter conditions for who's a citizen, and he wants only, although he didn't, this Republican lawmaker isn't saying educated, but he would have wanted only certain types of people who play a role in the organic whole that is society to be able to vote.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's interesting that these
Well,
come that
He
time.
didn't get the nominee.
no,
So
Vivek got thrown out pretty early, and with very few. I don't even think he got any delegate
Well,
votes to going into the convention.
he didn't get any delegate votes, but he was for no name per candidate. He got about 22% of the support at one point, and now he's on Trump's team.
Mm.
Hmm.
But so it kind of worked in his favor. I mean, he's
Yeah.
a billionaire,
Well,
so he doesn't care.
Yeah. By the time this episode airs, the election will be long past. We're going to be
Oh,
airing
wow.
this around the 1st of December. So we'll see what the results of this election will have been at that
Yeah,
time, and
actually
whether we're moving closer to aristocracy or tyranny.
should we
Which
bet?
direction are we going? Which direction are we going?
It's a good question. Exactly.
So, Daniel, I don't want to keep you all night here, but I want to make sure that we have covered a little bit more about what we might think Plato would have thought about why uh, uh, well, he might have thought more about bees, the role that a colony of bees would have in his decision to use them as an analog for a society. And do you know if he had anything good to say about the rest of the hive, or was he only pointing out the fact that we can't have drones?
I think he was just focusing on the drones. I don't think he said much
Mhm.
else about the rest of the hive. But what I do know is that the Greeks and then later medieval philosophers as well very often use analogies of the beehive as a good society. They saw beehives as a
Yeah.
good, well-ordered, organized society. And it's actually quite funny because in a later text that I read by a guy named Montaigne,
Hmm.
he uses bees actually quite extensively to demonstrate how human political capacities, like our ability to organize ourselves socially, exists in the animal kingdom in the form of bees. And he seems to claim that everything that humans can do politically, bees can do just as well politically.
Oh,
So this theme of
that's
using the
pretty cool.
beehive, yeah, that is pretty cool. But yeah, the beehive is a recurring way of illustrating what a society looks like, or an idealized society.
Mhm. And we're going to go out on a limb here, and because he never really left the city, and because he was such a deep philosopher, he never probably kept honeybees of his own.
Well, I did not keep honeybees.
Mm,
I'm pretty sure
probably
Plato
not.
would not have been the one to do that. No.
No, probably not.
So
We
he
had a
probably
discussion
though.
maybe last episode, Bidzina and I were trying to decide whether or not Elon Musk is a beekeeper, and I kind of threw it out as maybe a 80% chance no, and maybe a 20% chance yes. But it's thinking about it a little more, I'm going to bump it up to about 95% chance that no, he would have never been a beekeeper.
I doubt he had the time for that
Or the interest.
or the interest. I did have a philosophy professor though who was a beekeeper.
Oh yeah?
So yeah.
What's her story?
Susan
Or his
Judith
story,
Hoffman.
her story. Ah,
No,
Susan Judith Hoffman.
yeah, she has beehives out here in Quebec,
Hmm.
so in the country, and she really enjoys keeping them. So
Did she give you any of the honey from their hives?
no, she didn't. She didn't. I think they only have
Well,
times now. So
well,
yeah.
she maybe the bees would be doing better if she had given you a little bit of honey, just as a kind of, a sign that you're trying to bring in the honey gods.
I'm sure that would have worked.
Mhm.
I
Oh
know
well.
that Elon, he's not a beekeeper, but he's been pretty prominent on the Babylon bee.
Oh,
Oh yeah, of
Yeah.
course. The
the
sarcastic
humor.
or the satire, satirical right-wing onion.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Well, that was all
Well,
I
good
wanted to
for
say
him.
about Plato and the bees. But I thought that was
Oh,
interesting that when you read through 2,400-year-old text that
Mhm.
can run into some very poor understandings of beehives, but it's neat that it's embedded in this larger conversation about politics. So that's
Well, what that's indicating is their society did hold bees in something of esteem, and also the fact that when you write something, you're hopefully writing to an audience that can identify with whatever you're using as your analog. So, if you chose something that nobody ever heard of or knows nothing about, then your analogy won't work very well. But at that time, 2,400 years ago, it must have been that most educated people knew about bees, the structure of their colony, and the fact that drones were considered to be these useless, idle creatures that just kind of went into the hive.
no,
Stinger or wings, and no wings or no stinger, there they were.
no, it's interesting to think of that actually in his time, because he's using this analogy, it's possible
Yeah,
that people were more aware of the structure of a beehive than educated people are today.
that could be. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we don't spend too much time thinking about bees for the most part.
Mhm.
No,
But
no,
Zena, any final questions for the guy from Montreal?
I don't know. I thought this Gemini thing would be more correct, but I guess not. And then maybe I'll have to.
Well,
Hey, next time we'll go into Aristotle's biology. We might find that fun.
I think we would.
I
Yeah,
think we
I
would.
would. I would.
I
Okay.
think the thing
So
that stood out to me the most just in rereading this is how so many, and Bidzina, you mentioned this too, like how many of the things that you read here still make so much sense. Like his reflections on what's wrong with an oligarchy, or what are the faults of democracy, or like these sorts of things, they still hold. Like this stuff is kind of time and time again. If you return to the Greeks, there's so much wisdom there.
I do actually do have a question. Where does monarchy fit into all of this?
Ooh, he actually quite liked monarchies.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
would he
But
see that as a type of aristocracy?
I think he would have seen that as a type of aristocracy.
right,
He would
right,
have seen it as a form of hereditary aristocracy.
right. That's okay. Oh
So I
yeah,
did
no,
a Daniel, you sent me some materials to look at from the Republic, written by Plato, and in regards to bees. And there was one quote I kind of wanted to end on and maybe chat about just a tiny, tiny bit.
Hmm.
And that's a quote from Plato that says, "The bees can abide no drones amongst them, but as soon as they begin to be idle, they kill them."
Where is that?
Where is it? Let me see if I can pull that up for you. Let's see.
Was that
All
in what I,
right. That might not have been in what you sent to me, but that inspired me to do some more looking around. And the bees can abide no drones amongst them, but as soon as they begin to be idle, they kill them. That sounds kind of final, doesn't it? Quote used as a metaphor for the behavior of bees. I'm just looking at basically quotes.guide.com, and that's a quote from him. I just was fascinated with the fact that Plato would use such strong words as to kill, to kill those drones. And one of these days we should do something on the drones being killed. I've got some really good videos that were taken last fall where the bees were dragging the worker bees were dragging the drones out of the hive and literally killing them. Like they were.
it might have been the silver-souled bees who got tired of their oligarchy and wanted to kill off all the rich, lazy drones, and were trying to move closer to an aristocracy.
Hey, that could be. That
That
really
could be
could.
it. That
That's
could be it.
one way to look at it. Okay, so
Uh,
Plato aside, yes, Bidzina, one more
no,
question?
no. I was gonna say a good way to end it is we could go back talking about that mushroom hat.
I
Here,
like it. Okay, yeah, I like it. We did start off saying that we would have more to say about the mushroom hat.
how much
Yeah,
did how much do you think it cost me?
Uh,
200 euros.
No, no, less than that, less than that.
three hours of work,
Pretty close.
pretty close.
Close.
Depends on what job you'd have, minimum wage or working as a
No,
lawyer.
No, working as a tree laborer.
Working as a sophist.
Oh, working as a sophist, it would certainly be something like that.
You could
But no,
buy it in an hour.
it was about $150, a little less
Mm.
Canadian.
Not bad.
Okay, for those people who are listening to this podcast, Daniel Miksha is wearing a hat, and it's a hat that he purchased with $150 more or less in the country of
Of Romania.
Romania, which is next to Rome.
No, it's next to Hungary.
Okay, so how did you end up in Romania looking for hats?
Well, I was going on a road trip from Budapest, and I went up through, and so the western part of Romania is Transylvania. It's kind of ringed around with these mountains, and there's a Hungarian speaking region. And so we were driving through the Hungarian speaking region, kind of going on a road trip, and we found this village where they had tons of kind of handicraft made by the villagers. And actually, this coffee mug I've got here, which is painted really nicely, is one of these pieces of handicraft. And we were told that there's also a fellow there who made hats made out of mushrooms. We actually had to go kind of track him down. And so we were walking around, and it was funny because one of the villagers asked us where we were going because we were kind of going up the side street, and we said that we were looking for the mushroom hat maker. And then they pointed us directly to his place.
Hmm.
So we went there, and he had a little workshop set up where he had these mushrooms that he had dried out. And then after they dried out, it was to kill off the worms, apparently. He'd wet them and he would peel them with a sickle. And he would take these peeled sections and he'd kind of beat them flat with a mallet. And then he'd kind of somehow, I think using water, kind of almost melt them together. So it's not actually sewn, the seams on this hat, but it's made out of,
It's hammered together
it's hammered together, yeah,
from mushrooms.
from mushrooms.
So he
Oh, that's amazing.
forged them together. He welded them together pretty much.
Essentially, he did. Yeah, yeah. It was
And they could have had worms. I wonder
apparently
if that's how Robert F. Kennedy Jr. got his brain worm.
brain worms from eating too many mushrooms filled with worms.
Maybe.
I doubt that.
So
Oh.
it's do you perhaps know Paul's statements?
Oh, Stamets. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He also has a mushroom hat.
He also has a
Mhm.
mushroom hat. That's right.
I do know. Actually, I knew that when I was buying it. That was part of the reason I was so excited when I heard there was a guy making mushroom hats in the village. I was like, no way. I have to go find him.
That's
So
how
you
I
and Paul are the only two people in North America with one of these hats.
Mushroom hat buddies. Although his business is apparently picking up steam, he was quite proud because he's just kind of operating out of his house. And he said that he had sold mushroom hats to ethnographic museums in Germany and stuff like that. So he was pretty excited that people
Well,
were
Mhm.
getting wind of it.
the podcast Paul Statmans was on that I watched has 12 million views.
Oh my God. In that case, 12 million people know about
And
these.
he's wearing the mushroom hat the whole time.
Maybe I should have worn it the whole time.
You should have worn it the whole time, Daniel. Yeah.
No.
Mhm.
Well,
No, I do. You have a really nice hairdo. I think it fits the professional topic.
I got
that
the
you were
haircut
doing.
today, actually.
No, it's
That's
nice.
amazing.
It was 20
Usually
bucks.
a first day haircut usually isn't that good. You usually have to wait 3 or 4 days, but it looks good.
That's so true. Actually, it's always hard to get when they cut your hair fresh. It's always hard to make it look good.
Mm-hmm.
This is true. This is true. Anyhow, thank you for having me on. I'm glad
Yeah,
we get
you and Plato.
to
Yeah,
Plato,
yeah,
and I think next time we'll have to delve into Aristotle's biology, and I might
love
see if
to.
I can get some comments from my Aristotle professor because she would have some opinions here.
Oh, that would be really great. Yeah, maybe we can get her on with you and us. Yeah.
We have to
Yeah,
see.
she could be the fourth guest in the Zoom. She
Mhm.
could do it from her office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'd have to see.
Painless.
I'd have to ask her, but we'll see about it.
Tell her there's potential that if you wear your hat, that 12 million people could be watching.
Perhaps.
Mhm.
Hope we can attract that many people to listen to her talk about Aristotle.
Thank you, Daniel. This has been absolutely great, enlightening us on Plato and drone bees and Bidzina. Always thoughtful, interesting questions, and I'm really glad you mentioned bringing up that hat one more time because that was worth it. Do you want to take us home, Bidzina?
Yes, thank you everyone for listening. Join us back next week at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And Daniel, if you have any last words, feel free.
No, thank you for having me on. I really enjoy getting to discuss philosophy with people. And when it has to do with bees, it's even more fun. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on again. And
Okay.
yes.
Bye, folks.
Bye, folks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, yeah, thank you for taking time out to do this. And we'll talk to you a little later.
Yeah,
Thank
sounds
you.
good. Good to see
Bye,
you again.
guys.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
I hope we can meet in person again.
Yeah, when I'm back in town. Yeah.